very often talk about meaningful choices when it comes to RPGs, but I think something we don't talk about enough is meaningful choices that players actually can understand. So I want to take this video to go into some examples and talk about that with you. In order to better understand what I mean by meaningful choices that players will understand, I'm going to use real-world examples from the following games. The Elder Scrolls series is without a doubt one of the best RPG series of all time. Originally, this was my go-to series when it came to getting new players into the genre. However, because I had been told that games like Morrowind and Oblivion were a little too tricky mechanically for a lot of newer players, the burden really fell on Skyrim to get them into the genre. I thought Skyrim to be the strongest of all the titles, because in addition to its mechanical accessibility, it was quite clear to me that the choices in Skyrim were very wide open and often really meaningful for new players. However, what I initially thought was a strength turned out to actually be a weakness to a lot of newer RPG players that I tried to immerse in the genre. Because of the open-ended nature of the game, and no choice was ever technically wrong or right from a gameplay perspective, they often found themselves frustrated with the outcome of a majority of the quests and encounters in the game. This specifically came up last year when I had lent my copy of Skyrim to a good friend of mine and was met with constant texts asking for help in these situations. I personally like to call this the Falkreath Dilemma, because it primarily takes place during a local quest called Ill Met by Moonlight. My friend had made his way to Falkreath and uncovered that a local family's child had been ripped to shreds, and trying to speak with her murderer, realized that the person was actually a werewolf, cursed by some sort of otherworldly being, is what he described it as. After speaking with both the man and the otherworldly being he had mentioned, he made his way to the beast and was met with a choice: hunt the werewolf for this god and this being that he had met to avenge the girl's death, or spare the werewolf and instead choose to let him live out his days in sanctuary, living in regret for his crime. However, despite how amazing this sounded, he told me he struggled a lot with this choice, which initially I as a game designer thought was a great thing, because people struggling with choices usually means it's a well-designed and meaningful choice, and there's multiple avenues to making the right decision. However, he had expressed that he actually grew frustrated with this choice, and after making it, didn't like the outcome one bit. The next day he had returned the game to me and told me that he couldn't get into it after a series of choices identical to this one pushed him away from the title. The most amazing thing I learned from this experience was that not all players consider meaningful choices to be meaningful. Sometimes as designers we have to understand that just because a choice might be meaningful to a large variety of our hardcore audience, that a new player trying to get into our genre might not understand a lot of the lore behind things like Daedric gods and making the right decision in a fantasy world that we've created ourselves. Ultimately, Skyrim is still a game I think is excellent, and I'll usually recommend it to players after talking with them a little bit about what they like about games first. But for newcomers to the genre, I have recently started suggesting a different title as the initial RPG experience that has shown some pretty great results so far, so let's talk about that one now. Now let's talk about the game that got me into RPGs. I'm talking about Fable. The primary reason I thought Fable would be a great first introduction to the RPG genre lies in its ability to have complex meanings in simple choices. Fable introduces choices to you immediately as you start the game. You wake up in your home village of Oakvale and are given a single quest by your father: buy your sister a birthday present. Because you're a broke peasant and an awful brother, you forgot it was her birthday entirely, and your father decides, instead of bailing you out again for another year, that he will give you a single gold piece for every good deed that you do around Oakvale. As you begin searching around the village for tasks to complete to earn this spending money, the game teaches you that doing good tasks isn't the only way to make some money. In fact, you can earn more money by doing the wrong thing or the evil thing. The player immediately confronts a man who he finds cheating on his wife behind one of the first homes, and the player can either tell the wife, earn good karma and a gold piece, or choose to keep it a secret, and the man will pay him a gold piece. The player is notified immediately which decision is good and which is evil. Because the tutorial is filled with these encounters, it becomes quite clear to the player, through the pop-ups of bad and good karma signs, that their actions are having an effect upon the world and shaping their character. And although these initial counters aren't all that meaningful, it sets a very strong foundation for when the game progresses and the player becomes more powerful. And because of that power, the choices they make become more meaningful, and it is always clear to the player, even if they're new, whether the choice is good or evil from a gameplay perspective. And I'm not saying that the system in Fable is perfect by any means. It obviously has flaws. There is no such thing as inherent good and evil sometimes. And some of the situations you find yourself in, like beating up a homeless man, is inherently evil. And why are you beating up the bully? I don't understand. But overall, I think the simplicity of the choices and the fact that the player knows gameplay wise what is good and evil really pays off in this game. The most interesting interaction I learned about when lending Fable to a buddy of mine is that he played through the entire game, making every good decision and choice until the game's conclusion. When met with a simple endgame choice of being evil and killing his sister with the sword and adding its power to his, or destroying the sword so its power wouldn't remain in this world and saving his sister, he actually chose the evil choice. And the way he justified this choice was actually brilliant. His reasoning was that although the sword presented itself as too powerful, he had already proven himself incorruptible through all of his vast good deeds in his playthrough. He remembered his childhood and how his entire village was murdered. He saw traitors being attacked on the roads and the corruption within the Heroes Guild. And the only way he sought to create a better world and correct these mistakes was to take this power to his and reforge all of Albion so that no little boy would have to lose their family the way he did. Now, it took me a few seconds to realize something. I could not wait to lend him Fable 2. Immediately, my mind was drawn to the plot of Fable 2, where Lord Lucian lost his wife and his daughter in a tragic accident, and he tried to abuse a powerful artifact to recreate Albion in his image so that no person would ever have to lose their family again. And despite how good he was, even him was corruptible. And you learn in Fable 2 that even if somebody is pure of heart, they're easily corruptible by dark magic. And he could not wait to play Fable 2 after I told him this. If there was anything I learned from this experience, is that he loved games like Fable because he had actually taken simple choices and expanded upon them with his imagination, rather than taking those complex choices from games like Skyrim, Witcher, and others and trying to break them down to a more simple gameplay standard. Overall, I think it's important as developers that we look at both games like Skyrim and Fable, and we try to understand what our audience is looking for when they play a role-playing game. And there's many other examples out there, and I'm going to get into a few more in this video. But overall, I think Fable is a really good starting position. If you have a friend who doesn't really understand complex choices in RPGs all that much, this will really help them, and I very much recommend you suggest they play the first Fable game. For those of you who don't know, I'm soon to be a graduate in game programming and design, and I have a fellow game designer friend named Sam who I often find myself having design talks with. I asked him the very question I've been talking about in this video, and he said that there's a single series that he always suggests to others who are looking to start into the RPG genre, and that is the Dragon Age series. Now, I'm no stranger to the Dragon Age series. Those are some of my favorite games. And he said that he always asks the player if they're more interested in a slower turn-based combat or more of a hack and slash combat, as the Dragon Age series can fulfill both player needs. If they preferred a slower, more turn-based combat, he would always point them towards Dragon Age Origins, whereas they liked a more action-paced and fast-paced combat, then Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition would always be easier for them to get into to make those meaningful choices. The thing he liked about the Dragon Age games is that meaningful choices and decision-making were informed through the use of extensive and well-produced cutscenes. The flashbacks and cinematography were really key to driving player choice, and I cannot help but agree. Constant cutscenes showing the struggles of mages and Templars really help the player to understand the struggle on a personal level, so they feel comfortable enough to combat it, choose a side, and make choices that affect these two peoples. Dragon Age Origins was one of my favorite games when it came out. When I first played it, I still remember to this day watching that opening cinematic of the armies of Ferelden holding back legions of Darkspawn just to be betrayed by the treacherous Terran Loghain. And I remember all the meaningful choices I had to make to ensure that he paid the ultimate price for the good of the Wardens and all the land. Overall, I think it's really important as game designers that we realize it's equally important that we remember that cutscenes are just as valuable for players making these meaningful choices, just as much as the gameplay sometimes. And I want to thank Sam for reminding me of that because it's a really easy thing to overlook. Now, the point of this video wasn't to say that one of these RPGs was better than the other. Honestly, these are some of my favorite RPG games of all time. But I think that as designers, often we overlook very important parts when we're designing meaningful choices. Sometimes players get into our genre and the barrier of entry is too high for them. And I think as designers, we should be more aware of the kind of people that are playing our games. I think a simple choice of obtaining a powerful weapon or destroying one could be made to be something great. Players can understand it. And even better, they can draw their own conclusions from it, just as like my friend did. And I think that more games should try this approach. We should always strive to create the kinds of quests and meaningful choices that our players love, but that shouldn't keep us from trying to experiment with new things. This has been a Game Design Talk by Can't Resist Tris, and I'll catch you guys next time.